Thousands of people will gather in Boston on May 7th for the annual Walk for Hunger. To tell us about this year's event and some of the factors around food insecurity are the lead organizer, the executive director of Project Bread, Ellen Parker, and the author of a book on hunger and economic injustice, Andy Fisher. Thank you both very much.
Great to be here, Chris.
I want to start with Andy this time because we're not just talking about people being hungry because we're such a poor country. There are other reasons. Talk about those in your book, Big
Hunger. Sure. I authored this book, Big Hunger, The Unholy Alliance Between Corporate America and Anti-Hunger Groups. It's published by MIT. And it argues that the problem with hunger is not, the solution to hunger is not free food. It's not more food. What we have is fundamentally the problem, what causes hunger is a symptom of poverty. And what we need is to address poverty first. We need to go upstream and really fundamentally address the whole issue of wages and how people are making money rather than relying on charity or food stamps even.
And of course, one of the big changes over the last generation or so is that we don't have those manufacturing jobs that people could get. They wouldn't have a college education, but they could make decent money.
Absolutely, yeah. I grew up in Youngstown, Ohio, which was the epicenter of the steel industry until about 1981 or so. When the steel industry went down, the jobs went down the tank, the town went down the tank. It's about 60. We lost about 60% of our population since then. And one of the problems is that the anti-hunger industry never went upstream and never addressed the issue of how to get more manufacturing jobs into a place like Youngstown, Dayton, Flint, Gary, Indiana. So as a result, there was a lot of economic insecurity, and I think we saw what happened in the last election as a result of that economic insecurity.
Ellen, how do you feel about this picture? Because on one hand, we have this widening income gap, more people in the lower half of that. And at the same time, there's this rising backlash against people getting any kind of assistance.
I guess I see somewhat of a different picture. So when we, on May 7th, when we have the Walk for Hunger, what we see are, I think, many, hundreds of thousands of people who are supporting justice, who say it's just not fair that this is happening. You always hear the stories about people unfairly on food stamps or unfairly on this or that. But, when you get right down to the community level, when you get to the neighborhood level like we are, people really understand what one another is experiencing. And I think what Andy makes a point in his book over and over again that what we need is justice, not charity. And I think there's a lot of agreement on that.
What about the people who come to rely on this food? I imagine all different kinds of people. Some people who can't work, some people who do work multiple jobs, maybe.
So I think that there's one basic way to divide people who use food assistance, and it's are they in the employment stream or out of it? So people who are chronically ill or on SSI or disabled have a particular set of problems. But for others, the unemployment is pretty low here in Massachusetts. But what they suffer from is like the lack of a living wage. And people wouldn't have to work 2 or 3 jobs if there was living wage legislation. And we all know that. So somehow this is a problem where you have to balance the immediate because you can't wait 5 years for people who are hungry, but at the same time not lose sight of really where you're going while you're helping people.
Andy, you talk about the corporations that pay low wages but donate generously to certain causes. Sure. Should we bite the hand that feeds here?
Well, I think you have to realize that they're feeding you with one hand, but they're taking away with the other. There's a fundamental injustice when a company such as Walmart is paying $9 or $10 an hour to its workers, but then donating hundreds of millions of dollars in cash and billions of dollars in food to food banks, but then has their workers rely on those food banks and on food stamps to make ends meet. The U.S., one of the House Education Committee back in 2014 found that we, the taxpayers, are subsidizing Walmart $6.2 billion a year because of their low wages. So we fundamentally have to turn the tables. We have to make sure that the taxpayers aren't footing the bill for Walmart's profits.
This is BNN News, and we're talking about the Walk for Hunger with Ellen Parker from Project Bread and the author of Big Hunger, Andy Fisher. Ellen, talk about, this is something you brought up already about the importance of getting people out there to put a face on this in the walk. Explain how that works.
So, as you know, this is the 49th Walk for Hunger, and just to kind of jump onto something that Andy said. You know, Project Bread is 86% privately funded. So to the extent that money does shape behavior, and I think it always does, who funds you has some influence on your behavior. You know, we're funded by mothers and fathers and neighbors and grandparents, and when we say something like we want healthy food in the schools, they don't say, oh my God, it takes too long, can't manufacture, can't change this, can't change that. They say absolutely. And, you know, so I look at it as the walk raises private money, but also that's our board of directors, that's our row of judges. And we find them to be pretty liberal and pretty progressive when it comes to giving people a fair shake in the city of Boston.
And when I see people in all these walks, this is the almost the most complete spectrum of people from around the Boston area. How do you translate that into a movement to get at the roots of the problem that you write about?
Sure, no, that's a great question. I mean, the first thing I want to say is that Project Bread is an extraordinary organization. As Ellen said, you know, they do derive most of their funding from the public, which gives it a lot more independence to say things that an organization like the Greater Boston Food Bank wouldn't dare say because they're beholden to their donors. But in terms of turning things as a movement, there already is a hunger movement. There's 200 food banks around the country. There's 60,000 food pantries. There's hundreds of anti-hunger groups. I think the point is that we need to take back hunger. We need to take back anti-hunger work from corporations. So it's not a glossy, shiny package that big corporations sell us to pump up their image. That it's really about social justice. That it's really about addressing the fundamental causes of hunger, about dealing with poverty, about dealing with the lack of power in low-income communities, and turning the tables so that the poor have power and the poor can be treated in a just way.
Ellen, this year's walk is back to full length now?
Back to full length. Last year it was a little shorter because of construction, and I would say by popular demand, we're back to 20 miles. And luckily, the construction was done about a year and a half ahead of time, which is sort of amazing. So we're going all the way out to Watertown, out to BC, and all the way back. And our walkers are really excited about it.
So for details on how to get involved and what to do with pledging, you've got the website people can check
right.
out.
ProjectBread.org.
And finally, you have a toll-free line for basically the food source hotline for people who need help. We should emphasize too that even if people are worried about maybe immigration status, that they can still call and get help from this.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you picked up on that because the food source hotline is anonymous, and we're in East Boston. I live in East Boston, and I know that people are very, very nervous here in the city of Boston right now about immigration. Some parents have even said to us they're afraid to let their kids get school meals. So this is a totally anonymous source, and I hope you put the line up so people can see it. It's a totally anonymous source, and they can ask whatever questions they want.
And finally, Andy, if people want some more information about your book, you've got a site as well?
Sure, they can go to www.bighunger.org.
Thank you both very much. Andy Fisher and Ellen Parker.